right, welcome everybody to Guidance on Grading and Crediting Policies during COVID-19. I am Denise Pope. I am a senior lecturer at the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University and co-founder of Challenge Success. And I am here with fellow organizations, Stacy Caldwell from the Mastery Transcript Consortium. Stacy is the executive director there, Joe Feldman, who is the founder of Crescendo Education Group, and Randall Booker, who is the superintendent of Piedmont Unified School District. And we are going to start off with some logistics, a little bit of a poll and some Zoom instructions for all of you. Then we will each do some opening statements and open it up to Q&A. We actually have a few questions that have been coming up repeatedly to us, and then it will be up to you to do some Q&A. So why don't we go ahead and start with the poll. We would love to know who you are. What is your current role? And you can go ahead and mark school administrator, school board member, district administrator, teacher, school counselor, psychologist, social worker, parent of a school-age children, student, or other. And if you could just go ahead and vote now, we would appreciate it, and we will show you the tally. Okay, we have the majority are school administrators, welcome, and quite a few teachers, counselors, a few school board members, very few parents, no students, and about 10% other. So welcome to all of you. Now let's get to some Zoom logistics. I don't know if some of you, many of us are familiar, but just in case, what we're gonna do is if you have, we're going to use the Q&A function for actual questions to the panelists. If you have questions or thoughts for your peers, you can leave it in chat. And if you're having any technical difficulties or technical questions, you can also put that in chat. If you want everyone to see what you're writing in chat, you're going to select all panelists and attendees. And if you have a technical question, you will just ask the panelists. When it comes time for Q&A halfway through, we want you to actually go to the Q&A section, and we'll allow you to upvote the questions that you think are the most important. So you're going to click on the little thumbs up button on the questions that interest you most, and we will go to those questions first. And if you get disconnected, you can return to the meeting using the same link. Other issues are often remedied by just refreshing your browser. All attendees will be on mute and won't have any video showing, and we will be sending out the recording of this webinar to everyone who signed up. So I think that is it for the Zoom tips. I wanted to go over the guidance overview that our organizations sent out. We are all research-based educational organizations that are focused on student-centered learning, well-being, and equity. And we got together in order to provide guidance, ideally to all US schools, independent schools, public schools, charter schools, and even those outside the US during this really unprecedented time of COVID-19. And you will be able to click on all of our web pages are hosting the particular wording of the guidance, but I'm just going to go over some of the main bullet points here. The first and most important thing that we're asking you to do when it comes to grading is to shift all grading to either credit or incomplete or no record. And let me just kind of qualify what that means. It's different from pass-fail. Credit incomplete means that no student will be getting a failing grade due to situations beyond their control. We know that every household is different. We know that there are students who are struggling with shelter and food insecurity, who may not have access to technology. We know that teachers may not be used to doing this kind of teaching and learning and are also struggling with very similar pressures in addition to childcare issues. And parents at home may or may not have the ability to actually be there with their kids and be helping them through the schooling that you're providing, the lessons that you're providing. So because of the wide variance for students, for teachers, we know that it's really improbable that the learning that takes place will be equivalent to the learning that takes place during normal times. So we don't want to disadvantage any student. We don't want to offer failing grades. We offer the suggestion to give an incomplete and to allow students to make up that work at a later time. And if all else fails, you can also use the no record option, which would be actually taking the course off the student's record, which for some students, particularly those who get ill or families are ill, and it's just going to be impossible to make up all the work, that might be a great option. The most important thing through all of this is to communicate to students and staff that fostering a climate of care and connection is the highest priority. We know that students cannot learn when they're not healthy. All of us have been saying this for years, right? There has to be a primary put on well-being. We've known for years what stress does to the body and what stress does to the mind. And it is one of the top stressors that students say on our surveys at Challenge Success year after year: overload, stress, and pressure. And now during the time of COVID-19, we can't even imagine what's going on in some of those households. So the first priority for everyone should be to convey to students and staff to reach out and to keep building those personal connections and to make sure that kids are safe, that they feel safe at home, and that you are working on fostering belonging. Obviously, to the fullest extent possible, and everyone's situation will be different, you want to ensure equal access and support for technology and other tools to support learning at home. And ideally, you want to provide clear guidelines for teachers and students that less is more. I know that all of you are doing Herculean efforts to try and get your kids online, to try and get your families connected, to try and support your teachers. But at a time like this, we always say less is more, right? People try to cover way too much in schools, but at a time like this, it's really, really important to offer a structure that is probably much less than the kind of content and skills that you would normally cover in the last part of this year. So just a word about health and well-being. We know that it may seem that kids have more time these days because there's no morning commute. A lot of extracurriculars and sports have been canceled. I just don't want us to make an assumption that they're able to use that time productively. I know myself as an adult, and I have every resource here, I would not want to be graded on my performance of the days late compared to my performance when I'm not under stress and pressure and dealing with kids at home. And I feel like we shouldn't hold teachers or students to the same standard. I also know that that time that they have may not really be true. There may be increased family responsibilities and chores. There may be taking care of younger siblings, holding the household together, and also just the sheer difference of being on Zoom or an online platform all day is really, really exhausting. And I think all of us can relate that meeting after meeting, it doesn't allow you to do your best work. And if there's a way that we can think about chunking work time and chunking school time and really cutting back on the academics in a way that makes more sense, where you can go deep, might actually allow students to engage more. So we know that in order for learning to happen, health and well-being have to be our top priority. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Joe Feldman from Crescendo Education to give his opening statement.
All right. Thanks, Denise. And thanks to all the Challenge Success staff for putting this together. I know this is a very difficult time for everyone, and so thanks for carving out the time to join and support it. So my background, I'm a former teacher and a chair of an English department and a school principal of a couple different high schools and a district administrator in New York City and in Northern California. And I started Crescendo Education Group but in 2013 because I had always struggled with conversations around grading in each of those roles. And I found that there would be ways to support and normalize critical examinations of grading and looking at how to make it not just more accurate, but how to make grading more equitable. What we find is that when we look at the history of grading, It's based on century-old ideas about kids and about learning and about schools. And in many ways, traditional grading practices undermine our equity efforts. And grading is one of the key deliverables that schools have. They provide services, but at the end of the day, caregivers and parents want to know, how did my child do? Excuse me. And the irony is that none of us are trained with how to grade. It's not part of our graduate school training. And so it's difficult to have conversations about grading generally. And it's particularly difficult to have it during this very challenging time. Excuse me just a second. So with so many pressures placed on teachers, particularly during COVID-19, how should we think about grading? And what are ways to ensure that it fulfills its primary purpose, which I would argue is to accurately describe a student's level of mastery in the subject area? And if we confirm that that's the purpose, then we want to make sure that during this time, it continues to fulfill that purpose of accurately describing students' level of mastery of the subject. And there's three problems that are particularly emergent during this very challenging time. The first is the stress that Denise was talking about. We know that that's altering student performance. And so we know that we are not likely to see an accurate description of what they know and can do during this time, whether because of the medium that students are trying to communicate it in, or the stressors that are interfering with their cognitive skills. And interestingly, schools normally help to mitigate the stress that students feel, and schools aren't able to do that in the ways that they could before. And so we're left with students really having to be self-sufficient to manage the stress and trauma that they might feel. The second challenge during this time is that remote instruction is actually a specific and specialized pedagogical field of knowledge. And we are all doing our best to adapt to this and to translate our curriculum to a remote learning format, but we are not able to do our best work and provide the same level of quality instruction. Even the mightiest of us are unable to make that pivot seamlessly. And so students aren't getting the same quality of instruction or support. So if we were to assign a letter grade now, there would be doubts about whether that letter grade this spring from like an English sophomore class would actually mean the same thing as it did last year at this time. The third and probably most important aspect is something that Denise touched on, which is that we want grades to not only be accurate, but we want them to be equitable. And that means that we don't want a grade to reflect a student's circumstances or environment. And if they did that, we would just be perpetuating achievement disparities. During COVID, students are almost completely dependent on their home environment and the home supports, which are all outside their control. And they don't consistently have technology. They may not even have internet access. Even if they do, if there are multiple computers in the household, it's a press on the bandwidth and speed. We know that parents who are available and have more high educated backgrounds are able to provide more direct support for students. And we know that some students are disproportionately weathering the unemployment that their parents are facing because of the economic impact of COVID. And like with the work on supporting students' mental health needs, schools pride themselves on being able to mitigate the disparate circumstances of their students. But in this time, again, because we're unable to sort of wrap around the net of services that schools normally provide, students are more subject to the disparate resources and environments that they have. And one sort of little asterisk on all this is that we don't know who's doing the work at home. And some students may be getting a lot of support, whether from friends or relatives, and some may be getting none. And so if, for all of these reasons, if the grade is supposed to accurately describe what they know and can do, we can't do that accurately during this time, and we certainly can't do it equitably. And so if we were to try and give letter grades, we know that we would be disproportionately rewarding students who have more resources and more supports, and disproportionately handicapping and punishing those who don't, in a much more egregious way than we might normally, because schools aren't able to offer all the supports that they might normally do. And that's why, as Denise said, the best policy to confidently give grades that we think are accurate and preserve the integrity of the institution and deliver that product to parents that they can trust is to have pass and incomplete grades. And meaning incomplete would be, and just to wrap up, incomplete is that there would be a future time when students would be able to satisfy the requirements for whatever courses they were not able to complete now.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, your opening statement.
Thanks, Denise. And I'd like to start by just saying thank you to Denise and Joe for your just consistent support and advocacy for the health and well-being of students, the equity in how we think through these range of issues, and Joe for your consistent thoughtfulness around what grades actually mean and how we best take on that work. And I'm looking forward to also handing over to Randall after my portion to really share what it takes to make this happen on the ground. Just to introduce our work for folks that aren't familiar with us, the Mastery Transcript Consortium is a growing network of public and private schools who are really transforming the high school experience, and in doing that, also introducing a digital high school transcript that will tell the story of each student's unique strengths, abilities, and interests. The MTC was founded on I will start to echo Joe here a bit, was founded on the idea that the traditional transcript and the traditional grading system, by which I mean letter grades for single subject work, can really hold back the type of learning that really is possible in high schools. So we know that when schools partner with their communities to allow students to solve authentic problems, when schools introduce a range of learning and experience, and students are able to customize their work to align with their passions, oftentimes that work that they're doing does not fit into tidy little subject and hours boxes. So we as an organization fully believe that the traditional grading system should be looked at more broadly, and that the focus should always be on supporting and guiding student learning, meeting students where they are, supporting them with what they need to really achieve against both very rigorous expectations and to their full potential. And frankly, we also understand that making that sort of transition really takes some time to do well and to have happen effectively within a school. So if we step into the current context of this spring, in this moment, as both Denise and Joe pointed out, there's a whole range of new variables that have been added. And the inequity concerns that schools face in any situation are really both exacerbated and in some ways changed and shifted. So we support this statement as an organization for two simple reasons. One, we think it's the right answer for students to support them in their wellness and their learning. And two, we believe it's the only equitable answer. Now, as we've been in conversation with our member schools, we want to stress that supporting students in their wellness and their learning doesn't mean letting students go, doesn't mean letting go of expectations. It really means meeting students where they are and making sure that they get the sort of supports that they need within their individual context to be able to do as much good work as is possible given their circumstances. Finally, one third thing that I think we really should mention, since we are a network of currently 313 schools, we know that when we get together as a membership, or we think more broadly about all the schools that each of these organizations are working with, that the collective voice can start to be powerful. So, in pulling together this statement, we recognize that each and every school is going through their own analysis. And I would say from our conversation with member schools, I have been deeply impressed with the degree to which, even when facing a whole lot of other issues, schools are digging in, doing some really good work, thinking through this in the right ways, and are consistently leading with care for their students. And we think that the more these conversations are happening, and the more that, frankly, folks are finding a way to say, yes, you know what, moving to a different policy for this spring, moving to a credit, no credit, credit incomplete, no record sort of policy is the best answer for our students. The more we do that collectively, the more that makes it easier for more folks to take on and do that work as well. I wanted to share just 1 to 2 quick examples from our network. As I mentioned, folks are doing a range of supports here. I think a couple that tell the story, and then I'll hand off to Randall. One, Champlain Valley Union High School, public school in Champlain Valley, they have decided, after thinking through that their students don't have reliable internet access, many of them have to take care of siblings, have relatives who are ill or becoming ill. They have decided to move to a pass/pass with distinction, and they've done that, and they're getting they're getting a fair amount of support and also some pushback from folks, but feels like it's absolutely the right answer for what is best for students. And then second, I will quote Raj Mundra, who's the Dean of Studies at Phillips Academy in Andover, Mass, because I think his short paragraph really captures what a lot of folks are thinking through. So he says, during this crisis, we were clear that the relationships and well-being would take priority over assignments. Additionally, we understood that pass-fail would be more fair and equitable for students who had varying demands, competing priorities, and unequal access to technology in their home environments. Every teacher, as well as a student support team, has multiple checkpoints for engagement every week. And if a student is not engaged, we follow up appropriately. So I think that is a nice example of the sort of thought and care that people are putting into this. And with that, I think I should hand off to Randall, who can tell us the story of what's actually happening on the ground.
There we go. Thank you so much for getting the opportunity to speak. Thank you, Denise, and the whole team there at Challenge Success. I'm following the chat line, and with 346 participants, I'm watching people introduce themselves from all over the country. So welcome, and welcome to our little part of California. So thanks again. My name is Randall Booker. I'm the superintendent for Piedmont Unified School District. This is my 5th year as superintendent, my 17th year in Piedmont as an educator, and I've been an educator for over 23 years. And I think in order to tell our story about how we arrived at our decision around grading for second semester, I think it's important for our participants to better understand Piedmont as a community, because we're really a community of educators and learners. This community is deeply, deeply invested in education. It always has been. It's what attracted me to the district, and it's what's kept me in the district, this fervor for education. But I would say equally, they're invested in the health and well-being of students. It's been a priority for us in our strategic planning and our decision-making across the board. I do need to call out really incredible leadership across our district, because we couldn't have come to the decisions that we did without these partnerships. So really looking at our Board of Education, Amal Smith, Corey Smagel, Megan Pillsbury, Dr. Sarah Pearson, Andrea Swenson, our administration, our site level and director level administrators, our teachers and classified staff led by Gabe Kessler for our teachers and Tara Salazar for our classified staff, our education foundation, parent clubs, community support groups, the parent community as a whole, and our student leadership. And I bring all those up because we couldn't have made any of these decisions in a vacuum without the input and collaboration of really everybody. And that's really the hallmark of how our community operates when it comes to education. I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit, because I think in many ways some of our actions in December, January, and February led up to our ability to make the decisions that we made. Back in December, on December 9th, we held a special board meeting, or a special board workshop on student stress, because we were recognizing that we weren't moving the needle as quickly and as dramatically as we wanted to in our district around mitigating student stress. And so we had a packed room of teachers and classified staff and parents and students and administrators, really to have an honest, lively, informed discussion. I don't know if we came out with groundbreaking answers, but it kept it on the forefront of everyone's mind, especially as we moved into our development of our strategic plan, or what we call here in California, our Local Control Accountability Plan, or LCAP. And so we then moved into January 13th and January 22nd, where we pulled the board together in two subsequent special board workshops, really for the sole purpose of doing some vision exercising or vision boarding on where do we want to see our students in 5 years. And again, not just with regard to academics, but social and emotional learning, their engagement, their civic engagement, kind of all across the board. And when we developed this vision or these vision boards, we actually cut things out. We were crafting, in a sense, these vision boards. It was incredible to see how aligned our 5 board members, myself, and some other participants were in our vision around where we wanted to see our students. We moved into community engagement in February and March to help us to develop goals for our district in our strategic plan around these areas. And I think it's important to hear our goals. They're really short, to help you understand how we came to the decisions we did. Goal number 1 is really around social emotional, and it reads, all students and staff will feel physically and emotionally safe and part of a caring and inclusive community. I'm really proud of that goal because Piedmont is, it's a high achieving district academically. There is an emphasis on college admissions and teaching and learning, but to lead with a goal around the social emotional, I think speaks to really what's at the heart of this community. Goal number 2 jumps into the academic. All students will engage in relevant learning experiences that foster lifelong curiosity, creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication, and responsible citizenship. And goal number 3 really talks about our community and culture. Teachers and staff with district partners will ensure an outstanding educational experience for every student through collaboration, innovation, and professional growth. And so that led up, I think for many of us across the state, maybe even across the country, to our special board meeting on March 13th, where the board, along with district leadership, made the decision to enact a school site closure and student dismissal. This is important because we were one of the first districts in the state of California to do that. It was not an easy decision. We didn't have all kinds of support on that decision at the time, but we had a very strong board. We still have a very strong board who was eager to do what was right for kids. Again, I bring all of that up because I think it serves as an important background as a foundation in our decision making. We jumped into distance learning on March 17th, and we needed time though, even though we jumped into that, we needed time to lean on our partnerships to come to other decisions. Early on, I leaned on the statements of WHO Director Dr. Michael Ryan as they greatly influenced my decision-making process. And you can watch this on YouTube, but he made some very important comments. He said, you need to react quickly, you need to engage with communities very deeply, you need to be coordinated, coherent, be fast, have no regrets. You need to be the first mover. You need to be right if you need to be right before you move, you will never win. Perfection is the enemy of the good. Everyone is afraid of making a mistake, but the greatest error is not to move, and the greatest error is to be paralyzed by the fear of failure. So going into some of these decisions with fidelity, I really believed that our teachers, classified staff, and leadership all embodied those remarks. What we're collectively doing isn't perfect. Our decision-making isn't perfect, but we press on, we recognize we're growing, and we're embracing this educational landscape that's been foisted upon us. And we all have faith that our educators and students are gonna grow into this. It isn't easy. There's going to definitely be hiccups along the way, but we have to remember, I think, overarching that these are the same educators that we've leaned on for years to nurture and cherish our students, mine included, that have gone through Piedmont and go to Piedmont High right now. So with that, working with board, admin, and teachers, we first developed some goals around our distance learning that really embodied, again, that foundation for decision-making on grades. And in priority order, I'm just gonna read the first one though. It reads, to provide opportunities for students to maintain social and intellectual connections within their school communities. That was really, really important to us. At that point, we paused, and we paused to listen. And I think that's one of the most important things we did in all of this. We listened to the Alameda County superintendents, we listened to principals and directors, we surveyed teachers, we surveyed families. We partnered with Board of Education. We listened to students. We listened to university admissions. We listened to challenge success. And we got a lot of feedback. And from that feedback, which certainly landed, I want to say, everywhere across the spectrum, especially on how to administer grades, we focused our attention on 3 groups. And that was really teachers, students, and university admissions. Teachers and students were loud in their feedback about the integrity of a letter grade during this time, in that it doesn't hold integrity for all the reasons that Mr. Feldman described. Equity and access, equity and delivery, stress and well-being during a global pandemic. And then we really leaned on university admissions and their strong communications that a credit, no credit will not affect admissions. I just want to wrap up by saying there was a lot of conversation about student motivation. If you take that letter grade away, will there continue to be student motivation? And again, we had to continue to lean on kind of the foundation that we've built for years and years and years in Piedmont. We have faith in our students. They work hard, they put in that good faith effort, and they communicate when they're overwhelmed. We have faith in our teachers. They work hard. They have the best interests of our students in mind. That didn't just go out the window with this pandemic. And they'll also continue to communicate when they're overwhelmed. And that's why we moved to a decision of pass, no pass, around really looking at participation being the key. It's not about points or grades any longer. It's not about how well you do on a test or an assessment. It's about, can you continue to participate in the learning? If you can't, we'll work with you along the way. But what we really want you to do is put in that good faith effort to participate. And just again, a personal story, my younger son submitted a piece of artwork for his art class. He spent probably about 45 seconds on it. And that teacher turned it back to him and said, no, time for a do-over. You got to put in that good faith effort that I know you've been able to do in the past, right? And that was the right call to make for my son, because he didn't put that good faith effort in. And it was a good lesson for him that he has to continue to try. And we're going to lean on our teachers to determine that and to work, because they know our students best. It's been a challenging decision. We've had a lot of pushback. We've also had a lot of support along the way. So again, it's landed across the spectrum, but we've leaned on our partnerships from the beginning. And I've personally leaned on that statement from Dr. Michael Ryan, that perfection is the enemy of the good, and recognizing that we're going to grow. So I think I went over time. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randall. It's really helpful to hear how the decision-making process has gone. I think in the interest of time, we're going to skip the pre-planned questions and move directly to the Q&A from the audience. And if some of those questions overlap with the pre-planned, we will get to those as well. But I know we have a lot of questions. I'm hearing from our people behind the scenes that we have a lot of questions. So why don't we go right to the first one?
Great. I'm going to, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm going to direct this first one at Joe Feldman. And if it's wrong, just pass it off to someone else. So this person wrote, please comment on the view that grades provide a sense of continuity and normality. Removing grades would be another change or disruption, and for some would remove gratification that comes with grades. Do you think these concerns ever outweigh what led you to your conclusions?
And I just want to put in a note for brevity for all the panelists. Try to keep your answers really short because we have a lot of questions. Joe, you're on mute.
Thank you. So grades are one of the trappings of school. They sort of make school happen. But the stakes are so high that I think we're able to accomplish normalcy by reinforcing the teacher-student relationships and the giving feedback to students. And I think those outweigh sort of what grades feel like in a school, especially when they have such huge impact. And to give letters at this time, as I said, the cost and the people who it would be hurting are far outweigh sort of the structural ideas of what grades may seem to be in this tumultuous time.
And I just want to add too that we're not saying you shouldn't evaluate and give feedback to assignments. We're talking about grades of record that go on transcripts. And so I don't want there to be that confusion. And I know, Stacy, you had an answer to a question planned along that line. If you want to say two things before we get to the next question.
Sure, I'll just echo you. I think the focus on the learning, the focus on feedback, the focus on continuing to support students is the important element here. So those shouldn't go away, and those should remain as sort of rigorous and supportive as they would be in any typical situation given the student context. But given the range of context, is the issue is in translating that to a consistent letter grade and having that mean the same thing.
Thanks. Sarah.
Yeah, so Denise, here's a question for you. How do we respond to high-performing students who feel like they are being forced to give up what would have been an A and feel like they're being punished by being given a credit or a pass?
Yeah, and this kind of goes to the idea that some schools were thinking about giving students a choice so that you could choose either to have a grade of record or you could go pass no credit. And what we are saying here with all of our organizations is it's really not a choice. There are going to be some kids who, for whatever reasons, are not going to be able to get those grades up. And so the other kids are going to, everyone's going to be disadvantaged then if we're not allowing everyone to have a fair choice to raise their grades. So, and believe me, I know this is tough. I have people say this to me all the time, but I have straight A's this semester, and they're just going to go away with a poof. And how does that seem fair? And so this also goes into sort of how you want to handle the grades that came up until this time, right? So there's no reason that you have to obliterate all the grades that came up until the time that you went to remote learning. And you can write on your school profile that goes to the colleges exactly how you want to handle those grades. But for the time that's happening during remote learning, we really don't want a grade of record. It's not fair to the kids who, for whatever reason, even if they have internet, we don't know if both their parents are medical providers and the stress and worry and anxiety going on in that house is too great to allow them to focus on their work and raise those grades that other kids in other resource houses will be allowed.
I'd just like to add something. My organization works with schools and districts and universities and colleges to improve the accuracy and equity of grading. And it always comes up that when we start really pushing equity, there is pushback from those who have been benefiting from the way things have been and from the structures that have been set up for so long. They feel like something's being taken away from them. And they're the ones who are the most vocal, have the most resources, the greatest acuity with language and power. And so the idea that we would give students that choice, it seems like a compromise that wouldn't hurt anyone and would just benefit those who can take advantage of it. But we know that the students who will benefit from being able to get letter grades are the ones whose supports make them most immune to the effects of the pandemic. And we as schools are trying to make sure that the policies we put in place level the playing field and give the opportunities to all students and not create structures and policies that disproportionately reward certain groups and disproportionately hurt others.
All right. I know, Randall, you had to make a decision about how to handle third quarter grades, or the grades that happened before COVID-19. Do you want to just say a quick little 2 minutes about that?
Yeah, we recognize that third quarter grades really are just a progress report. So I think we need to start there. They don't show up on the transcript. We had to remind our community that that's the purpose they serve. We collected third quarter letter grades as work to date. We posted those in our student information system, but that's as far as they go. They don't get posted on a transcript. Now, what we did tell families and students is that, one way to acknowledge the work that's been done or leading up to third or through third quarter is when they are asking for their letters of recommendation to colleges for college admissions, to ask whether it's their teacher or their counselor to indicate how they were progressing, whether that's a letter grade or just general narrative about that good faith effort they were putting in and the caliber of work that they were producing. Because again, we believe that letter of recommendation holds so much more weight than just a single letter grade or necessarily a GPA point. And so that's another way to include it.
There was also a question, Stacy, that came up in the chat around college admissions, that, and there were a few that also came up in the Q&A around how you're thinking about this in terms of college admissions.
Sure. Not at all surprised that that came up. We have been hearing that question a lot from our members and folks more broadly. And so we have, we consider it part of our mission to work closely with college admissions folks. We've been out having a number of conversations. And here's generally what we're hearing. So first of all, I would say colleges and admissions folks are leading with care and understanding here. So we hear three consistent things. Number one, they recognize the impact that COVID-19 is having on this spring semester. And remember, they are having it on their campuses as well. So many of them are also dealing with the decision with decisions around remote learning, around how they're going to handle grades and crediting. So they're in the midst of it themselves. They recognize that this semester is different. So, what they're going to do is view this semester in context. So frankly, that means that the way they view credit incomplete, the way they view grades will be in that context. So to Joy's point around a grade of a B may not mean the same thing as a grade of a B else in another time. Colleges already get that. So they're going to view anything that they get in that broader context. And then third, they're really looking for ways to let students tell their story. So that might mean looking at more pieces of data. It might mean looking more deeply at a letter of recommendation. It might mean looking at a student essay. But they're looking for a range of ways to let students really put their best foot forward. So what does that mean? I think, we've all seen colleges have started to get out there with their sort of, with their statements around credit, no credit, pass, fail, will not hurt students' chances. Here's all the other opportunities that they're giving folks. In the cases where you're not seeing those statements, I would say, and typically what we're seeing is that the private colleges are moving a little bit faster than some of, especially the bigger state systems. Just remember that these colleges are very busy, so they're dealing with their own campuses, taking care of their own students. They're trying to think through what happens this summer, what happens in the fall, how are they making sure that they're caring for their students. They're dealing with a whole lot of admission decisions and uncertainty this spring as they then move into what the admission cycle will look like for next year. And I think that, also within the big state systems, they're just frankly also working through a whole lot of approval processes and rules that they need to get through before they can officially post a statement. So trust that everybody is going to view this in context, trust that everybody is going to lead with care. And then I would say from a student and a school perspective, think about how you're best telling the story. Think about as a school, regardless of, given the range of ways that you've come to and landed on your decision, how are you telling that context? How are you telling what you did to determine what your crediting policy actually looks like and what a credit or a pass actually means in your context? Telling that story will be good for students and will be good for the process.
Great. Randy, I'm wondering, there was a question about final exams. What have you have you thought through about that? I'm sure you have in your district, and how are you planning on approaching that?
Yeah, we've left that up to teachers in that final exams, like any other kind of assessment or a piece of homework, while it can be offered or provided by the teacher, the only kind of feedback we're going to give on that is what you got right, what you got wrong, some commentary, some written evaluation, depending on the course, obviously. But there's not going to be a letter grade or a point or a percentage at the top of the paper. And that's weird for a lot of people. We had a lot of back and forth with teachers about that particular, just the idea of not putting that final assessment point percentage grade at the top was, we had to wrap our minds around that. So grade it like normal, in the sense of letting students what they did well, letting them know what they did well, what they didn't do so well, where they can improve, and leave it at that. And so again, we've left it up to the teachers to decide if they want to issue a final exam. But again, it's just about participation in our district. It's not about a final percentage point or letter grade.
Great. Two questions, and I'll let you all decide who answers these, about parents and families. So one is, how do we manage expectations of families who feel that abandoning traditional grading is giving up on the school year, and students who think it's a signal to stop caring and engaging? And the other one is about, what are your recommendations for educating the family and parent community on this change in such a short period of time?
Joe, I think you might be the best person to handle the first question, if that's okay. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
That's all right. I actually think this is a great opportunity to help parents and their students, frankly, to understand about what evaluation looks like for learning, not necessarily evaluation of learning as the sole purpose of giving feedback and evaluation. So the idea that we would give students clear, detailed feedback on their performance, and getting that feedback and the relationship that's developed through that can actually motivate students to do better. And you think of it, there are tons of aspects of kids' lives where they get feedback for no high stakes reward, but they're still motivated. Think of every video game, sports tournament, everything. There are so many contexts in kids' lives where they're used to getting clear feedback, and that itself is motivational. We in schools, I think, have done a poor job with helping students see that, and instead of been relying on grades and sort of teaching students that that's why they're in school to do well. They didn't start that way as kindergartners. They were just excited to learn and get feedback. And I think this is an opportunity, and I think it's more conceptually difficult for the adults than for the students to understand how feedback can actually itself be motivating and exciting and support really higher performance and higher learning than giving points and grades.
I just want to throw in my favorite line that I teach all my students in my curriculum course, which is the Latin root of the word assessment is assedere, which means to sit beside. Grading and assessment, nope, you don't get a grade for how well you teach a lesson. You don't get a grade for how well the new product rolled out. In the real world, you get feedback. You get lots and lots of feedback to help you get from this point to this point. And that's what we don't want to see go away. And we can use this time as a really great time to get kids out of that sort of point grabbing mess that they twist themselves into, and get parents out of that too.
And just to sort of go back to the question, how would you talk to parents about that? What kinds of communications, and feel free others to chime in.
I'm happy to answer that, or Stacy, you do this for a living. Stacy, we'll turn it to you.
So first of all, I love that definition, and I'm going to steal it. And I think some parents would actually appreciate that definition and that communication. I also think that, you know, I've heard folks use a range of analogies, including you know, for many parents, comparing what's going on in the classroom to what goes on their high school sports teams. And the way that a coach consistently gives feedback, holds the bar high, encourages students, gets more out of students, and it's never with a grade. It's always with that sort of feedback and support and meeting students where they are. So I think there's a number of ways to sort of put that in context for parents and make it important. The other thing I'd say is, you know, depending on the parent, many of them are going to have all of those same college admissions questions, especially for the juniors. That's going to be sort of a high point of stress for people. So I think communicating confidence that colleges are going to understand the context, see this, and look for ways to help students tell their story, I think will be really important. And I think, you know, I've seen some stuff online where folks have done webinars, and honestly, sometimes these are the test prep folks. They do a webinar, but they'll pull on some admissions folks and they'll pull on other folks. I think telling that story, and if you can tell it with a local representative or somebody from the college side at the table with you helping tell the story, I think can be particularly effective as well, because it gets folks over some of the, oh, they say that, but I don't quite get it. When you see the person face to face, you can resonate with how real their concern is.
Great suggestion, Stacy.
Great. So this sort of crosses at one of the areas of this question. I think, Randy, might be great for you. Someone asked, is this guidance for all levels, elementary, middle, and upper high school? Is there a different recommendation you've given based on the level of school? And the other part of this question is around same advice for public, independent, religious-based, similar kind of question. But let's take the first one first with Randy, and someone else can chime in with the second.
Yeah, the focus of my opening and a lot of this discussion that we've had is really around secondary, middle school, and we're a very small district. We have 2,600 students. So one comprehensive high school, one alternative high school, one middle school, and 3 small elementary schools. So this is really about our secondary students. When it came to our elementary primary students around grading for that matter. It was really about abandoning our previous grading system. And again, going back to just providing feedback to families as to how students are continuing to progress, even in this distance learning environment. Not to hold any of them to that, but how are they progressing? And I think the big issue, we're in spring break right now. As we come out of spring break, one of the things we're gonna have to start talking about as an educational team is, where are the learning gaps going to show themselves as students move into the next grade level next year? And we need to have a plan on how we're going to address those learning gaps. That's way more important than grades, percentages, GPAs, any of those kinds of things. And we're going to have to spend some time identifying those and then communicating it up to the next grade level or the next subject level. How are we going to mitigate that into the 2021 school year? So it's primarily secondary, to answer your question, but we've had some discussions with elementary about providing feedback.
And go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to respond to the second part of the question, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We've heard from several small independent schools saying, we have been able to get everybody online, and we have a really caring community. We have teachers who are used to this kind of teaching, and we feel like we can just do grades as normal. And what I have responded to them is two things. One is, you may think it's grades as normal right now, but even, as I said at the very beginning of this webinar, I would hate to be evaluated on the way I'm doing my job right now, given the stress that all of us are under. I feel like there's going to be families who won't say to you, hey, we need help, but really there's a lot going on there. So as much as you are small and caring and usually can figure out who's in crisis, I worry that you won't have any idea just the extent to how so many people are reacting to COVID-19, whether they admit it to you or not. And the second thing I would say is, we really were hoping to get all schools on board with this particular policy, because it's going to send a message that health and well-being must come first. And it's almost like we want you to be a good neighbor. And if you've already made your decision, we'd love for you to actually rethink a little bit and say, hey, you know what, we are in a slightly different position as a smaller independent school, but we know what's best for kids right now is to take the pressure off and to understand that the grading that would be going on is really not equitable. And that's why we're asking everybody to change to this policy.
And the only thing I'll add to that is that the ability to provide supports for students is dependent on you knowing what supports they'll need. And during this time, it is very likely that students won't and families won't share the extent to which they are experiencing trauma, and they may not even be aware of it. So I wouldn't underestimate the hidden information that is out there that is affecting student performance.
And teachers.
And teachers.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question, and this is one that I've really wanting to ask. It's a junior at a public school who's wrote, I agree with everything that's said so far about equity and the inability to fairly grade during this time, but I have 2.5 months of grades pre-COVID that I worked really hard to get. Not allowing me to have those grades or an opportunity to opt into having my grades disclosed creates a ton more stress for me and doesn't feel supportive at all. I support a hold harmless approach, which doesn't harm anyone affected by COVID, but reflects my achievements so far. What's wrong with that? I'll let you guys figure out.
Sure.
Joe,
So as I think we were saying before, and a number of districts and schools are doing this, for the work that was done up until like the end of the third quarter, up until the time that schools were closed, some schools are actually carving out a separate report so that could be put on report cards that could be available. With regard to your concern that it's a hold harmless or isn't going to hurt anyone to have the work that you're doing count in the form of a grade, the problem is that it's going to affect lots of people. And I want to just, I think a helpful way to think about this is that I think you might be thinking of it as, I'm doing all this work and it's not going to pay off. And I think there's two other perspectives you might try on. The first one to try on is that it's actually going to benefit you a lot, because when we are back in schools and in the work that you'll do in the future, you will be able to rely on that knowledge and skills that will aid you in the work going forward. And the second perspective is that the idea that you would be in competition with other people, that somehow you will be disadvantaged, and there's an advantage that you had that you'll be penalized with. If everyone is getting pass, no credit, or pass incomplete, then it's really leveling the field, and you won't be placed at any particular disadvantage because of that.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Joe. That was so beautiful. And I just want to add one thing, which is if everything students do and parents do and families do is about the grades, we're really missing out on the point of learning. And one of the things we've been saying for years at Challenge Success is to stop talking about the grades as the be-all end-all, and to really challenge that narrow notion of success and think more broadly about learning in general and the purpose of learning. And so I congratulate the student on the hard work. I think there's lots of ways that schools can show and signal the hard work that took place during normal times. And I think as a student right now, it's a really great opportunity to start thinking about, what is the purpose of education? What is the role of learning? How is what I'm doing right now going to help me later in life and help me be the kind of person I want to be? And that's what you want to showcase authentically on any college, transcript, any admissions records, anything for anyone who uses grades. It's really more about the learning, not what you earn.
And Randall and Stacy, yeah, do you want to chime in?
I think that is super well said on both fronts, and I would say, so if I were you and I'm thinking about getting credit for the work, think about the work which you're most proud of and why you're proud of it. What is it showing? What did allow you to do in terms of digging in with the experience? And that gets through then to what Denise is talking about. She just gave you a nice little intro to how you could write up an essay for an application, I think. But thinking through the work you're most proud of, and then how you want to show that. Not having a grade doesn't mean you can't show your work. It means you can show what you're most proud of and why it impacted you and what that means for the future.
I want to just jump in to say that I think it's important as we hear from students on this issue. I appreciate the student that brought this up. We're hearing this from a lot of Piedmont students, and I'm sure students across the country. I think it's easy to just quickly dismiss those feelings and say, oh, no, we need to shift everyone's mindset from achievement to learning. I think that does students a disservice. It makes them feel unheard. I think we need to acknowledge what they're feeling in the moment. We as educators, as adults, have produced the mindset that they're carrying right now. It's actually on us. So let's acknowledge what they're feeling, number one, and then let's help them process that. And I think the best way to help them process that is first to work with families. I think parents have to be the first educators in their ability to model for their children that we are all going to shift from achievement to learning, that it's the learning that's so important. And for parents to give examples that, from their own experiences, their work life, their college life, their personal life, whatever it may be, to help kids over time shift in their thinking around this achievement issue. But I think it's going to take time to get them there because it's an environment we've created for the last, 100 years or whatever it is. So.
Excellent point. I know we have 2 minutes left. I want to thank all the panelists and let people know we will be sending this videotape out. Someone asked if you could have the slides. We will make sure those go to you. Please check out all of our websites for further information. There's a lot of different information and resources, COVID-19 resources available to you. And we are going to put this slide up, it looks like right now, which has that information on it of ways to contact us. And we are available as individuals and also as organizations to answer further questions. So thank you all for hanging in there and listening. Special thanks to Randall Booker, Superintendent of Piedmont, Stacy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Mastery Transcript Consortium, and Joe Feldman from Crescendo Education Group. And thank you all for doing what you can to keep your kids healthy and to make sure that we truly are valuing learning, equity, well-being in this time of COVID-19.